Since its earliest days, the FBI has been working to combat organized crime. From chasing John Dillinger and investigating bootlegging, to helping send Al Capone to Alcatraz, the Bureau's efforts to unravel organized crime efforts have become a centerpiece of our history as a law enforcement organization. But these efforts aren't just the stuff of history books. Today, the Bureau and our partners continue to track and investigate transnational organized crime activity across the Eastern and Western hemispheres. On part 1 of our podcast's deep dive into organized crime, we'll define transnational organized crime, also known as TOC, and explain its current ecosystem. This is Inside the FBI.
Transnational organized crime refers to cross-border groups that conduct a whole host of illicit activities to gain income or revenue in a myriad of different types of illicit activities. But it's mostly discernible groups that are across several borders or jurisdictions that conduct illicit activity.
That's Joseph, a unit chief from the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Section.
The notion of transnational organized crime is kind of this gradual globalization of everything. The borders don't mean as much in this digital age, and so groups have found that helps them leverage their illicit activities in a way of concealing themselves in regions around the world, but still victimizing people in the United States and other parts of the world.
And when it comes to discussions of the current organized crime landscape, Joseph says, words matter.
A cartel almost certainly is in illegal smuggling and narcotics. A mob or mafia may diversify into other types of crimes. Transnational organized crime can be interchangeable with mob or mafia from time to time, but generally the references to mob have been stuck with certain groups, most notably the Italian mafia in the United States, La Cosa Nostra, the Russian mob or mafias. But this day and age, it's cartel or transnational criminal organization or transnational organized crime or trafficking organization.
When the FBI envisions the transnational organized crime ecosystem, it essentially splits the globe in half. This results in two distinct areas of responsibility: TOC East, which covers the Eastern Hemisphere, and TOC West, which covers the Western Hemisphere. TOC West includes the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central and South America, and the Caribbean.
We are not just dealing with drug trafficking or illegal activity happening in the United States. A lot of what we deal with in the TOC West world has international connections. There are no borders.
That's Claudia, a supervisory special agent with the FBI's Transnational Organized Crime Western Hemisphere Unit. Transnational criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere aren't just moving drugs, Claudia says. They are also engaging in crimes like fraud and human trafficking. TOC hotspots within the Western Hemisphere include Mexico and its border with the United States, and Colombia. Within Mexico, different transnational organized crime groups operate in different regions, though these groups' territories, leadership, and structures are ever-changing. Regardless, Claudia says, everyone has the same goals and objectives:
financial gain, control, and power.
This hunger is exemplified by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG for short.
One thing that sticks out to me with this particular cartel is you can go online and see a variety of different videos that CJNG is constantly putting on the internet. If you look at them, they look like a military. They have so much power and control in Mexico that they may operate like independently as a military entity.
Other prominent transnational organized crime groups that operate within the country include the Sinaloa Cartel and Gulf Cartel. And if we shift our focus south to Colombia, we'll reach the territory of another transnational organized crime group of note within the TOC West AOR, the National Liberation Army, known in Spanish as El Ejército de Liberación Nacional, or ELN for short. This guerrilla group, which is also a designated foreign terrorist organization, controls specific parts of Colombia and engages in narco-terrorism and other criminal activities. You can listen to our episode about FBI 10 Most Wanted fugitive Wilver Villegas Palomino to learn more about the ELN's history and illegal activities. Notably, all three of the aforementioned groups, the CJNG, the Sinaloa Cartel, and the Gulf Cartel, have also been known to engage in timeshare fraud, a scam that cons part-time property owners into shelling out hefty sums of cash. Now, let's give the globe a spin and take a look at transnational organized crime in the Eastern Hemisphere.
The Eastern Hemisphere has a very broad grouping of actors in it, as you would imagine. It covers the rest of the world. So with that comes a whole host of different subgroups of organized crime. They don't do the same type of activities as you may see more towards on the west side. It's very heavy duty, narcotic centric with smuggling and some other diversification. On the east, it ranges from cyber enabled crimes to frauds, narcotics as well. But it takes on a whole host of other new and creative schemes that keep up with the times. It becomes digital and complex schemes to defraud people in ways that we will try to catch up with and counter that with our own investigations. They're quite creative, and as time goes, new groups come to the top of the organized crime threshold.
Within Italy, Joseph says, La Cosa Nostra, or the Sicilian Mafia,
would be seen as a very localized, lesser threat, but they're still a threat nonetheless. They've learned not to be so violent and to be a little bit more on the white-collar fraud schemes. But a group called 'Ndrangheta is actually a more transnational Italian organized crime group that has taken advantage of our focus on La Cosa Nostra to conduct its criminal activity throughout the world without being focused on as much. They actually dictate more of the drug trafficking in Europe than any other group in the world.
Nearby, he says, Eastern and Western Balkan transnational organized crime groups also operate, and Albanian organized crime threatens our European and British partners. On top of that, Joseph says, Romanian organized crime groups
actually have a large contingent in Mexico and the United States, and they're very active in complex cyber-enabled fraud schemes, credit card fraud, and other financial crimes that defraud a lot of people. What they've been able to do is kind of leverage the small pockets in the United States, in small areas where you're not looking for these type of crimes to happen, where they can victimize people that are just innocent victims to that.
More broadly speaking, Balkan organized crime groups also engage in passport fraud, access device fraud, identity theft, healthcare fraud, real estate fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking, human smuggling, prostitution, and extortion. Eurasian transnational organized crime groups, meanwhile, are politically and financially motivated. These groups are influenced by, associated with, or originate from the former Soviet Union or Central Europe. These groups often engage in healthcare fraud, securities and investment fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking, extortion, auto theft, interstate transportation of stolen property, robbery, attempted murder, and murder. Their activity also threatens to destabilize the emerging political institutions and economies of the former Soviet Union, where nuclear weapons remain deployed. The potential national security implications of this destabilization cannot be ignored. This brings us to Russia.
Russian organized crime is and will always be a constant threat to us. What makes the Russian organized crime threat even more complicated is their partnership with the Russian government to advance state objectives for monetary reasons. So where you may have counterintelligence threats, you may have Russian organized crime.
In the Middle East, Joseph said, Israeli transnational crime groups are the most notable. These groups, he said, have been linked
with Hezbollah in its money laundering capabilities, but they are also a significant presence or a significant threat around the world.
Then, shifting gears to Africa, he says,
African organized crime is dominated by Nigerian organized crime. There's been a lot of focus on defrauding elder groups, romance scams. When you get those letters saying the IRS needs you to pay the taxes on a payout, it's usually one of these groups. Some of those groups don't rise to the level of a mafia or mob. Like with Nigerian organized crime groups, they were known or born out of these confraternities, which were kind of ad hoc groupings that kept a brotherhood going.
Moving over to Asia, Joseph said that Southeast Asian transnational organized crime groups have a strong American presence. Chinese talk groups also pose a significant threat, he said.
On the Asian organized crime front, you often hear the term triads or other groups that have been in the United States for a significant amount of time. They often have these very interesting names that permeate through the organized crime world.
He added that the Japanese Yakuza, much like the Sicilian Mafia, had become more of a domesticated presence within their home country.
Obviously, they represent a significant threat in Japan, but as much as we've tried to make sure that it did not raise its head here in the United States, we haven't found them to be as significant a player as the Chinese organized crime.